Hello and welcome back to the Air Armoury. I'm JRH and today I'm going to be looking at Wasp No. 2 pellets. As you can see, I have 2 tins of these pellets, and they are different, so as well as a review video, this is also a comparison video with a bit of a history lesson thrown in for good measure. The first tin I have here are manufactured by IMI under the Eley name, whereas the second ones here have lost Eley from the title and are manufactured by Bisley for John Rothery Wholesale. So we'll start with a history lesson to get it out of the way, to explain how we went from those to those. Now, as far as I can ascertain from the research I've done, the Eley brothers, Charles and William, founded a company in London in the 1820s which manufactured cartridges for firearms, and then several mergers and takeovers later they became part of Noble Industries. And whilst this was going on, a company called Kynoch was founded in 1862 which made caps for caplock firearms. We then skip forward to just after the First World War when Kynoch merged and became part of Noble Industries. Then in 1926, Noble Industries, by then known as Noble Explosives, merged again and became Imperial Chemical Industries, ICI. Then in 1962, to mark the 100th anniversary of the founding of the original Kynoch firm, that part of the company was renamed IMI, Imperial Metal Industries. Then in 1978, IMI became independent of ICI, and it was in this following period that the Eley Wasp pellets were made. We then skip forward again to 1990s, early 2000s, when Bisley and John Rothery Wholesale bought Eley's pellet manufacturing arm. Now, that's the history lesson out of the way. As I say, that's all I could find from researching on the internet, so if anyone knows any of that to be incorrect or has anything else to add, please comment on the video. Let's have a closer look at the pellets. There are 3 types of Wasp pellets. Number 1s, which you can see here, they're 177 and in a red tin. Number 3s, which are 2-2 and come in a purple tin, although I don't have any of those to show you. And the ones that this video is on, the number 2s, which as you can see come in a blue tin. Now these are also 2-2, but are 5.6mm instead of the standard 5.5mm, which the number 3s are. Now the reason they make these pellets is that because although it's now accepted that most 2-2 barrels and pellets are manufactured to 5.5mm, as I'll show you on the converter app on my iPod here, 2-2 is actually 5.588mm, which means that standard 5.5mm pellets can sometimes be a bit small for barrels machined to true Imperial 2-2. And this is often the case with older British made guns. I use these in my BSA Super Meteor, and that's a Mark IV, which means it was manufactured between 1974 and 1979. Now looking at both in comparison, starting with the outside of the tin, they're obviously very similar, as they're both the same type of pellet. The original ones say Eley Wasp, have IMI at the bottom, along with the address. Now these have the address with a postcode of B67UT. I have read that there are some even earlier ones with a postcode of B67BA, and that they were even better, although I've never had a chance to try any of those. The newer ones don't say Eley on anymore, have a barcode across the centre. They've no longer got an address on the bottom, but do now have the Bisley website along the side. Now looking at the pellets themselves, the Eley ones on the left here are all very well formed and very uniform, whereas the Bisley ones on the right here aren't as well formed and have a number of imperfections. And I've just had a quick look through the tin and just pulled out a couple of examples for you, and there are a number of these in the tin. Now the Bisley pellets are very slightly longer than the original Eleys, slightly more domed, but the Eleys do have a much thicker skirt. Now neither pellet has a stated weight, so I've weighed a selection of each of them. The Eley ones are all quite consistent at 14.5 grains, whereas the Bisley ones varied a lot more pellet to pellet and came out with an average of 13.5 grains. So the newer ones are around a grain less than the originals. And the reason the two pellets vary so much is because apparently the original dies and the moulds that they were made on were destroyed. I'm now going to look at and compare the accuracy of the two pellets. I'm going to shoot 10 of each at these 14cm square targets. And I'm going to be using my BSA Super Meteor, which I've already showed you, from a range of about 12.5 metres. And I'll start with the Eleys and then move on to the Bisleys. So here are the targets up close. First the Eley one, and the Bisley. But to make them easier to compare and analyse, I've actually transposed them onto one target. Now the green ones are the Eleys and the black ones are the Bisleys. Now obviously the scope needs zeroing as they're all shooting high and right. Starting with the Eley ones, there's a spread of 2.8cm. Now they're shooting much more towards the centre of the target and there are not too many strays. Then compare that to the Bisley ones. There's a spread of 4.8cm, much further right and much higher. Well, there's a nice tight grouping here of 5 pellets. The other 5 pellets, so half of them, are just all over the shop. I've retrieved some of the pellets from the target, which were stuck to a thick book. First, we'll look at the Eleys, which have retained the original shape quite well and aren't too compressed. And then compare that to the Bisleys, which are visibly more deformed. I really like the old Eleys. They're a well-made, relatively accurate pellet that retain their shape upon impact. And although you can't buy these anymore and they're not readily available, I wouldn't go as far as to say they're rare, as some shops will still sell new old stock and you can often find a partially full tin on eBay, and in both cases they should cost you around £15 for a tin. The Bisleys are a noticeably inferior pellet with a number of misshapen and deformed pellets, and they're not as accurate, although they should only cost you £6 or £7 for a tin. Now whilst I always like to have a tin of the Eleys tucked away somewhere, I don't actually shoot them very often due to the fact that they're more expensive and more difficult to get hold of, but I do shoot the Bisleys quite regularly as they're an inexpensive pellet to shoot in bulk and they suit my purposes for plinking and informal target shooting, although I wouldn't ever want to use them for any kind of competition or for hunting. Now, alternatives you could use to the Wasp No. 2s for true 2 barrels. I've heard RWS Superdomes fit very well, and you could also use a standard 5.5mm pellet if you've got a decent pellet seating tool and you're willing to take the time to seat each pellet and create a good seal. That concludes my review of the Wasp No. 2s. I hope you've enjoyed watching the video, so until next time, keep your arms in the air.